Greetings and felicitations. Welcome to Jackson Snyder Presents, a production of the Vero Essene Yahad, a Hebrew Nation Radio original. I've got on with me one of my big friends, Jesse Miller, Yishai, who's been a roadman for Yahweh for a really long time. I've known him for 5 years, and he has been going through one ministry after the other. And I'm going to just ask him the question that I have written here. Considering that you've been Yahshua's roadman for at least the last 5 years that I know of, can you somehow give us the evolution of your ministry down through this time? And you might want to go ahead and introduce yourself as well from there. And I
Sure.
thank you for being on here.
Oh, yeah. Well, let me start by just Baruch atah Yahuwah. Thank you, Father, and invite you to be a part of this gathering, and pray that you would lead all things, and that your divine hand would certainly guide us in this discussion, that many would be Baruch through this time. So we give this over to you, Father.
Amen.
Well, like you said, Jackson, Jesse Miller here, and I do go by Yishai because I've come to an understanding through my dedication to the Father and just the walk that I've been on. I've come to an understanding, personal understanding, that the Hebrew language is the language of his people, the remnant children of Yaakov, or the called out assembly, however you want to address us, Kodashim. So I do that because I recognize that, which is part of the journey I've been on, I suppose. But we spent some time together. Was it 2016?
I think it was 16. Yeah, up in the mountains.
Yeah,
Tennessee.
Yeah, that was kind of on that was the front end of the journey, I would say. I was working for a company for about 17 years, and boy, I was burnt out, man. It was time to get out of the cubicle. And I had spent at least a decade and a half searching out the scriptures and seeking the Father, and met a wonderful lady, and we decided together that, well, it was in my heart already, but to take it to the next level. And so I had been doing extensive research, which was a big portion of why we came out to visit you and be a part of the ministry there. For me personally, I'll speak for myself, was because of the calendar. I mean, the Father just started speaking strongly to me, like, look, you got to start looking at time. Something about understanding time and walking in step with Him according to His time. And if you do that, then you'll be able to. It's one thing to observe the Shabbat, which is good, and the Moedim, the set apart days, and the festival days, all that's good. But the scripture says they're appointed times. So He's gonna show up at a certain time. If you're there when He's there, then you'll get the blessing.
Good point.
Is how I understand it. And so, to me, the calendar and comprehending time became very important. So I went online and did all the research I could do to comprehend this stuff, and of course, there's only a certain limit to what you can find, because there's a lot of bias, and everyone really wants you to jump on board their wagon.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And so, but in the midst of that, the Father's given me an ability, I can say, that allows me to kind of sift through the trash and find little treasures and golden nuggets here and there. And I pieced that together as well as I could. And I believe that because of my honest pursuit of it, the Father blessed me and helped me comprehend more than I realized that I needed to comprehend. So I'm grateful for that. But in the midst of that, I did nail down. My wife and I worked together to nail down this calendar. And really, on the front end, it was her that he was really speaking to. I kind of have to give credit to her on that. Well, not to him, but her heart in wanting to find these things, because she had a unique background of being a journalist in Yucatan for a period of time, and
Right.
she had to be there around the 2012 scenario with the Mayan calendar and all the interest the world was showing about this. Everyone was saying, "Oh, the world's going to end. The world's going to end."
Oh yeah, I
You remember that?
remember. Sure.
Yeah. There were people from France and Europe and everyone all going to all going to Yucatan, and people were gearing up and getting in their caves and, and
So
everything.
they actually thought that that was all going to wind up in Yucatan.
Well, I think that because of the interest that was the location
Hmm.
for where all this information was coming from, that the attention was drawn there.
Yeah.
And because a large portion of the archaeology and the evidence that was there for this, it just seemed, I don't know if it was the media or how it worked, but a lot of people are really drawn to go there. I don't know
Did the
why, but
world end at that time? The world
well,
as we know it, maybe.
maybe for some people. But what I did realize with that and the research that we had done is that and the understanding I have about Hebrew now is that its time is more cyclical and happens more in a spiral fashion than it actually does in a linear fashion. And the research that I did led me down a road of understanding that the calendar is actually based off of the 7-day week. That's the foundation. You have yourself a 7-day week, and really how I've come to comprehend is that the Chodeshim are also based off that same number. It doesn't change. It's the foundation. And I don't subscribe to an Enochian or a Zadokite or Orthodox Jewish calendars based off the moon. I don't do that. I do appreciate that I think it's the Zaddikite calendar that recognizes 364 days because it's based
Yeah.
off of.
Mhm. True.
Um, but no, that's how I came to the understanding. Again, I'll just speak for myself right now. With what I personally researched and looked into, it became apparent to me with my understanding that, well, like you said, was it back in 96 when a lot of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the information was released to the public. Catholic Church had a hold of it for quite some time. It was 96 that it
Yeah, a
got
little
released.
earlier than that, but it really didn't start coming out till about 96.
Is
I
that
think
right?
that they let that stuff go in 93, but it took that a couple of years just for people to get a hold of that stuff and try to figure out what it meant.
Right.
Hmm. Are you using a scrolls calendar? No?
No, I actually have one that I've been working on myself, and it's not based off of any other calendar except the scriptures, from what I understand. I'll just give it the layout of it is. Uh, it says in the scriptures to guard Chodesh Abib, and from what I understand, Abib is the time of budding. It's the time of spring, and so it's not necessarily the name of a month so
True.
much as it is the name of the beginning of the year. Is how I comprehend it. So what I understand is he's saying, look, you need to pay close attention to when the year begins.
Well, I think that doesn't that word also mean like green ears?
Right. Yeah.
Speaking of like green ears of barley.
Right.
Okay. Rather than having we know it's a name of a month, but it means more than that.
Right.
Okay. Springtime, time of budding, budding.
Yep.
Got it. Okay,
Yep.
continue.
And Eric Bissell is someone that I've become friends with. Him and his wife Karen, just love him. He's been doing tremendous work on the Hebrew, the Paleo Hebrew, and getting information out on that. So that was something that was in the back of my head. I was looking at the calendar, and you know, my partner was looking into this too, and she had kind of entertained the idea of, well, maybe the Hebrew somehow associates to the calendar. So we looked into that, and together with some friends of ours, we came to a conclusion that there's actually an Ivrit letter, maybe even more, because I'm not going to say that I fully comprehend it. There's still a little bit of work that needs to be done. I've put some stuff down on paper with some friend of mine, Andre Engelbright, who's an amazing young man. He's actually out in Panama right now. But it's set up in a linear structure, but it actually needs to be more in a spiral fashion if you understand it correctly. And that's where the Mayan thing kind of comes into play. They didn't understand.
Circadian, maybe a circadian rhythm rather than a cut and dried mathematical formula.
Possibly, yeah. It's like it's more like the golden ratio Fibonacci sequence, kind of the imagery that you get that people put out there in their artwork, that you see the infinite coming out and the infinite going in, you know, the macro, micro, you know, playing into each other.
Like a nautilus shell.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, we did this, and I saw it for myself, and I realized that that there is an Ivrit letter that applies to, personally, this is how I understand it, that there is an Ivrit letter that applies to each of the days.
When you
And
say Ivrit, you're talking about what most of us would understand as Hebrew, right?
Right, correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Yep, Hebrew.
Okay.
And so, and it's interesting, the scripture says, guard Chodesh Abib. So we applied the 22 paleo letters to the first 22 days of the calendar. And then we recognized that there was, you know, after that you have the counting of the Omer, and which is again based off of the number 7 up until Shavuot. And then it just occurred to us, it's like, well, I think that the idea here is that we're supposed to have these incurring first fruits days, these bikurim days, where it doesn't just happen once, but it actually occurs 7 times throughout the year, these bikurims, or days of first fruits, the first fruit offerings. So you have, we counted out, we had the first week, which associates with the creation week. And then even though it was only a one-time deal on day 10 with the Pesach lamb, that carries over into the 7th month, or the 7th Chodesh as well. There's a parallel between Abib and the last month, the 7th month, which from what we gather, there's just Abib, and 7 counts of 7 weeks, and then you're back to Yom Rosh Chodesh again.
So where's your starting point on that? Equinox, first moon, solar.
Yeah, I believe that there are several different witnesses that correspond. I think that it's based off the equinox. So you have you have the sun playing a role in that, and then you also have the moon, which corresponds with the sun. It's another witness. It's not the main witness, but it does bear witness to the time. You have the Ursa Major configured in the sky, and if you're paying attention, these celestial bodies will cut through as well. And I think it's that when the sun is at high noon, the moon is at directly at the horizon, almost like a was that a 45 degree, 90 degree. It makes a unique triangular shape, so you can see the unique connection between those two bodies. And then, of course, you have the witness of the earth, which is the Abib. It's not just the barley, but it's also certain flowers that bloom.
Oh, sure.
Certain other plants. If you're a botanist or someone who pays attention to those things, you will recognize that, there are certain activity. There's certain activity that begins to occur at that time of the year that bears another witness. So, so all those things do configure, and doing the sundial or recognizing the equinox is a big part of that. There is precision involved, but we've been witnessing this and observing it I have, and some others that I know up in Montana have been observing this for quite some time now. And what we've actually come to conclude is that Shabbat is on Monday of all days. And that because the year, it repeats itself, we don't go by the Gregorian calendar, so we don't consider leap years and all those sorts of things. And you kind of have to with people in the front end, because it's just so hard to get away from one calendar and consider another without always referring back to the original one that you've been made to consider.
It's burned into your brain.
Yeah, it sure is. So, getting away from that, it made it pretty easy. And I began to realize a lot of things. There was a guy, I think is Christian Truthers, a fellow named Justin, and I can't remember his last name. But he did a really unique episode one time, and he pointed out some things that I don't have it up. It's on my WordPress site, so I don't have all my work in front of me. I apologize for that.
Well, give us the name of that WordPress site again.
It's it's JMILLE70.wordpress.com.
Okay, got it.
But it talks about, there's several articles in there that refer to the Jewish Encyclopedia and a few other resources. And it's so funny because how it seems to be there's certain rules. If you're going to break the rules, you got to do it in plain sight and let everyone know you're going to break the rules.
Otherwise, you'll have spies looking at you, turning you in.
Yeah. And so some of the language in there is that, and I think it was one of the lead Jewish professors or rabbis who everyone reveres, had mentioned how the Goy or the Gentiles or people other than Jews aren't allowed to observe Shabbat. They have to follow what they call Noahide laws.
Yeah, the kind of law that just really never existed.
Yeah, I guess they referred to it because there were laws before Torah. I suppose there were certain things that were instilled. I mean, even Adam and Chua in the garden after the fall, there were still certain things that they abided by with the Creator that we would consider laws, or consider commandments or ordinances or ways of life, the ancient path, however you want to put that.
Mm-hmm.
So the Goy or the those other than Jews were not allowed to observe Shabbat unless they became Jewish, unless they joined the Orthodox Jewish faith, and then they were allowed to. But otherwise, it was against their regulation, their understanding, and they had pretty stringent laws of consequences against, even to the point of death. I mean, there's some really strong language in the writing. But whenever they wrote something, they'd say they aren't allowed to do this even an ordinary Monday. And it would say it again, even an ordinary Monday, over and over again. I thought, how silly.
What does that mean?
It just seemed, what a funny thing. It's a play on words how I looked at it. I was like, you know, ordinary, ordained, ordinary. It just seemed to really stick out to me. And I did a little more research and was looking online. It just, you know, everyone hates to go to work on Monday. And it's almost like everyone is forced to go to work. This is the first day of the week. You're forced to go to work on this day.
Yeah.
When in all actuality, it's a day that you're supposed to be resting. And it's almost like intrinsically, because we're made in his image, everyone knows, and they think it's for one reason. And the truth is, it's for another reason entirely. It's really something to do with walking in step in time with the Creator. And it makes sense to me, because you go back and you look at the days of Yahshua or Yahusha, which it took me a while to make this association too. But I mean, who are these Pharisees and these Sadducees? They're not Levites. You know, where did these people come from that the master had to continually confront? And my research led me to realizing that during the captivity, the priesthood was corrupted, and a bunch of infiltrators came in and took over where the Levites had left off, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And they based all of their theology and teaching off the Torah, but that wasn't really their belief. You
That's
know,
one of the times that came in historically is about 175 to 170 BC. And yes, you're right. The legitimate priesthood was all either executed or sent away, and all the usurpers came in, the Sadducees, and then even from a foreign country, the Pharisees came in from, Farsi, Persia, and got rid of the ordained priesthood there that Yahweh had put in place. So yeah, that's absolutely right.
Yeah. And so, coming from a Christian standpoint, I didn't make that association. I just thought, well, these are the people who are following the teachings of Moses, and I didn't understand it until I went deeper into the study, and I realized that we have a false religious system in place, which really changes the whole narrative around. Because you think, okay, well, Yahusha is now confronting a false religious system that isn't based off the Torah. He's confronting false religious teachers that are using the Torah, much like Hasatan used the Torah when he tempted him. It's pretty much the same way. It's like, okay, well, Yahweh says that if you do this, then you cast yourself off the side of this building and the angels are going to hold you up. He's like, that's in the scriptures, but that's not what he meant.
Yeah, we've come to the same conclusion on that. Exactly. He was living in a world where the religious establishment had been completely perverted, and for a long time.
Yeah.
So, well, oftentimes people don't get that connection because they kind of see Israel in that time as, well, a wonderful time with shepherds and wise men and everybody going to the temple and then having supper after the temple service, that kind of thing. But it wasn't like that at all. In fact, there was extreme violence going on every place, as well as being captivated by an enemy army.
Yeah. Yep. So, it would be much like, I guess, the master walking into a Catholic parish somewhere. It really would be. It'd be no different. It's like, oh, you guys got all these Catholic parishes set up. I guess that's where I have to go to teach.
I was thinking, St. John, the Divine in New York City. I thought, what if the real St. John came into this place and saw all these idols and everything? What would he think of that? No, it's a rhetorical question. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a good question, though.
Okay.
So yeah, what I came to realize, just kind of getting away from that topic back to what we were talking about, I realized that that the calendar, it really does have something to do with the language. And not only were the scrolls released, but what I came to understand is that there were 4 elements that were being reintroduced to us because there was a curse that had ended, and due to the fact of that curse ending, the identity of the children of Yaakov began to return. Ephraim had been dispersed among the nations. The DNA and the genetics had been all mingled with all the different peoples, the different nations. I suppose Yehuda or Judah somehow remained preserved. There's even debate on that, whether or not it's the Palestinians or the other folks who came back in the 1940s after Israel was recognized as a state again. But you look at the history there, and the whole reason why it became a state again was because of blood money. So it's like, is this really Israel, or is this someone's personal concoction based on mammon?
Man, I tell you, I've heard that question at least 3 or 4 times in the last few weeks. Exactly. What do you say about that? When somebody asks you definitively, what's the truth in this? I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
You?
Well, it's if you trace the money, it goes to the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds, and you'll know a tree by its fruit. And there's so many proverbs that say, you need to love the poor. You don't want to contribute to the rich, especially the ones who are, not to say that people who have wealth are automatically wicked or evil because they have wealth. But when it comes to the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, I mean, these are blue bloods, and they keep it all with their family. They're not real happy about distributing to anyone. In fact, we look at the eugenics program right now going around the world, and it's all about killing off the middle class. You got small businesses, everyone. I mean, people who never thought they'd be in a position right now that they're in their poverty, or contemplating.
We're also looking at the Great Reset that seems to be banking a lot on the COVID and has the same kinds of philosophies behind it as you have just mentioned.
Right. Yeah. So it's really it's an empire built upon the backs of the poor, with no favor at all to the poor, and in fact, with a lot of the poor being killed off. There's a lot of parallels going on right now between what's happening right now in our day and age and what happened in the Third Reich, Nazi Germany.
Absolutely.
So a tree by its fruits, and I don't have confidence that the modern state of Israel is truly. Well, I have to be careful, because even though the wicked will do something, Yahweh will still use that to his own end. But what I see, though, is not the fruit of Yahweh happening in Israel right now. What I see are gay pride parades and wickedness, on the highest level occurring. I see a great disregard for things that are meant to be kadosh, and this high level corruption. I don't want to speak against anyone in particular, but it doesn't appear to be anything that resembles the dynasty of Dawood or even Shlomo, or any of potentially Esau. He was one of the potentially righteous or somewhat righteous kings of.
Yeah. My theory on this is
first of all,
we are promised that before a millennial period that evil will be dispensed with. But first, before it can, it has to just come out everywhere, because it's got to be excised. It's got to be cut out. And it can't be cut out unless it's exposed. So I guess what we need to do is be exposing it every chance we get.
Yeah.
I'm also concerned about people, though, that use this exposure to make money themselves. That really disturbs me.
There is no getting away from that. It just isn't. I mean, it's like the days of Noah. So, people are always trying to get one up on each other, and lots of wicked, people. There's a lot of covenant breakers. People are breaking covenants left and right. You see that in our government. You see it in all the governments of the world, really. It's just, you think someone could just be a person of their word and follow through with what they say, but 99% of the time, they're just telling people what they want to hear until they get into office. And then it's whatever. I'm president for life now.
That's what we've got Torah for. Unfortunately, it just has not been manifested in the world. I hope that it will be, because when it is, then we'll all be treated equitably. We'll all have equitable justice. But until that time, knowing human beings, what can you expect? We need a savior.
Amen.
A Messiah.
Hallelujah. Yeah, and I believe that, I think it's Zechariah, chapter 14, that talks about that Zephaniah or Zephaniah. I think it's chapter.
It's 14.
And Zechariah, and then Zephaniah, chapter 3, I think it is.
I think you're right.
It talks about when the kingdom again is established, which will look more like Psalm 72, I think, more than anything else, which is a perfect depiction of an actual righteous dignitary. It's just such a beautiful psalm. But when that occurs, it says there that the poor will be allowed to live, they'll be provided for. And it says that the Melech Zaddik, or the righteous Messiah, the King, or Yahweh Tzavayot, I think it says actually in Zechariah, that he will require the dignitaries of the world to pay homage on Sukkot.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
And
exactly.
so there's this unique activity that's yet to occur that you don't see in the world right now. No one's acknowledging any of that. And if they are going to acknowledge that, then they're going to have to do it according to his timetable. They need to scrap all their own calendars, get rid of the business calendar, Gregorian calendar, Chinese calendar, all these calendars. You know, it's going to be one calendar for them to be able to show up on time for that appointment. If they don't, there's some grim consequences, some pretty terrible consequences. You're gonna be dealing with no water on your land for 3 years. That's not fun.
I think it's a pretty good judgment, though. I mean, I think that would work.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, continue on with your course.
Cause and effect. So I realized that the Ivri, or the Hebrew, and the Paleo in particular, because if you look at the modern, there's these Sophite letters, and there's 5 of them, so it technically makes the language a 27 letter language. But in the Paleo, there were no Sophite, and there were no Dageshes, there were no phonetic markings on the letters to distinguish their pronunciation or any of that. But what they had were these unique caricatures, these unique images that you could look at. And if you studied it long enough, you could actually get the image of what it meant by simply looking at the letter. You would know what it meant. Now, for instance, the Aleph goes like this with a line through it. And that letter, if you look at it, it signifies a lot of things in everyday life. Not some, well, even in modern day, but mostly in older times, or like Amish communities, you see the way that the horses are pulling a cart, or there's a configuration. It looks just like an Aleph, but it's this idea of the strength pulling everything behind. It's the one in front that's making everything happen. So that there's that concept, but then you also have this idea of it being somewhat of looking like a compass almost, or like, pointing in a certain direction. And so that's the idea, is that there was this anyhow, each letter is like that. You look at Bet, and it looks like a Fibonacci sequence. Mm-hmm. If you look down on a tent from on top, it kind of looks like the configuration of a tent, and you have this inner chamber of a tent, and it goes out, there's an outer chamber. So what you end up with is the concept of home.
So, like, does this come from Eric Bissell, pretty much?
A lot of he does do a lot of teaching. I have followed him quite a bit, actually, and have I believe that I've been enriched in my understanding from a lot of what he's taught, not necessarily, I mean, also from his very words, but also just my own time of prayer and just staring at this stuff, just staring.
Yes, I guess that could bring you some real strong insights if you're just staring at it. Until you get, I'm staring at this till I get something. I think that's pretty scriptural. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it works that way. You know, there's this idea of like the Dalit is a triangle. It's a door. It's an entryway. It's the first enclosed shape that we have. There's a lot of elements there. You know, the master called himself the door or the Dalit. So there's this application of these shapes and how we see them played out in the creation itself, and how we make that association in our mind to comprehend it. I don't think he made it so complicated for us. We make it more complicated ourselves, and with having too many options or something, I don't know. But anyway, what I realized is that there was a thematic application. There was definition inscribed to each day, not just for the Shabbat, not just for the Moedim, but every single day. And as I recognize, you know, like on one day, like even now, you know, I'm staying with some friends. I'm helping them out here. They help them. There's a mutual relationship we have going on here. I have a friend of mine who called me up every once in a while for work, and it just so happens that most of the time he ends up calling me up. It's on Gimel Day, that on the calendar I'm following, which Gimel, the concept of Gimel is travel, transporting goods back and forth. You know, it means camel in Hebrew, but, you know, the idea is more so of actually bringing one thing to another place, or accomplishing work, transporting goods, lots of travel, of going back and forth like a boomerang. And that's what I ended up seeing. I kept seeing these, you know, and it could just be something, you know, in my head because I'm looking for it and it's there. But even when I wasn't looking for it, just slapped me in the face. And I'm like, well, how interesting is this? There's something to this. Anyway, we ended up cycling these letters through the first 22 days, because there's only 22 letters. It ends on the first Bakor. You know, you have the creation week, then you have your the Pesach lamb on the 10th, which I believe was a one-time deal, really. And Scripture doesn't command to do that over and over again. It was really for that one instance, so far as I understand. Correct me if I'm wrong. But then you have the Pesach, and which, to my understanding, falls on the 14th day. It says the evening, but it corresponds with day 14. And then you have your matzah, or you have your feast of unleavened bread. And then right after that, you have your first fruits day. And we were thinking, well, what do we do now? We've got it set up for the first 22 days, and then we realized that that there was actually this cycle that corresponds with the 49-day or the 7 weeks of 7 count. They just cycle it through. And I could go into more detail about that. I think I'm not going to spend too much time on it. This is just one part of it. But it's a big part, because from what I understand, I think it was both Judah and the northern tribes, Ephraim, fell under their own curse. I think Ephraim fell under a longer curse than Judah. I don't know if Judah kept repeating its curse up until a certain point, but then the curse of Ephraim, I think, lasted 2,360 years. I'm probably off on that. I don't have notes in front of me on that right now, but I know that it was around 2010 where the curse ended, and it really just seemed to be that with the scrolls coming back into our hands, the Dead Sea Scrolls, with the language being revived. You know, I think it was Eleazar ben Yehuda who was credited for a lot of the reviving of the Hebrew language. And there were others, so he wasn't the only one. There's a fellow named Belich. Frederick Delitzsch, who also played a huge role in studying and reviving the language. But all of a sudden, in terms of having a certain identity as a nationality, you have to have certain things in place. You need to have your own language. You need to have your own calendar. You need to have your own concept of the divine creator, which that was another thing that happened. All of a sudden, everyone became interested in wanting to figure out what the creator's name was. It
Yeah.
became a very prominent topic, and
Well,
everyone was
that's
seeking
true.
yeah. And
It's
so
surprising. It's like it just fell out of the sky, all this interest. And still it goes on. But there are so many variations that people have. It's like, I don't think most of them have done that kind of contemplation that you have, trying to get to the truth of things. They're more apt to just listen to somebody. Don't you think?
I think there's a mix of that, and I think that there's also just a simple application of the Father moving on people and reviving the remnant children of Yaakov. And part of that is he's bringing to our mind and bringing to our remembrance his name again. We didn't treat it with any regard for so long. He's like, I guess you guys don't need to know my name anymore. It's not like you really call upon it or you really care about it, so I'll just take it away for a little bit.
Well, you got to admit too that it's been hidden for a millennium through certain scribes that just decided, even against what it says, that his name, its name, her name should not be spoken. That it, even like in the, if I understand it right, the so-called Noahide laws say that a goy saying that name is worthy of the death penalty. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, with Orthodox Judaism, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
From what I understand, yeah.
Right.
That's so. Yeah, so there are people who do, and I guess I can't judge everyone's heart. I mean, some people appreciate wanting to preserve that for a lot of the same reason why the Catholic Church didn't want to release transcripts of the scripture in a common man's language, because they thought, oh no, if we let all this out, then it's gonna wreak havoc and we won't have unity anymore, which is partly true. And yeah, if you let the name out, then you're gonna have quite a few people that will trash it out and disregard it and use it with false pretense and not really comprehend what it means and why he even wants us to know his name.
Right.
But I think all in all, it was his thing. And I think there are some scriptures that back that up, that say, I'm going to remove my name. You have no regard. I'm disappearing now. I am taking my name with me. But then here recently, in the not too recent past, the past decade or so, he's revived that. And so that's part of the identity too, is knowing who your creator is, or your concept of who you believe to be the divine creator. And then lastly, it's the land. So there's these four elements that make up the identity of someone who has a nation completely. The land factor is something that we don't see quite yet, because you see a lot of land grabs going on. You got, I don't know if it was the big flood. I think it was in 2008. I remember the Army Corps Engineers opened up floodgates in the Missouri. I think it was the Missouri River. I know it was up near Nebraska, so I think it was the Missouri River. But they said that there was all this water going up. There was all this water from torrential rains and just a heavy rain season. But they kept saying that there was a nuclear reactor, a nuclear power plant that was going to get flooded if they didn't release the waters from this river and dissipate some of the water. So they released all this water, and it ended up destroying, I don't know how many acres. I mean, just thousands of acres of farmers' land. and they all had to sell their land pennies on the dollar. It was one of George Soros's companies that went and bought it all out.
Sure. Well,
And yeah, and he went ahead and planted his GMO corn all over that, and that's what we have now is George Soros GMO corn, Monsanto corn, among other things, I'm sure. But all of a sudden, you got all these farmers who had this land. I don't know for how many generations. They just all of a sudden had to give it away for nothing. So you have all these land grabs going on, and again, it's a certain class of people, financial class of people that seem to be swiping up all the land. I mean, there's plenty to go around, but even with the millions of people that are on this planet right now, there's still plenty to go around. There really shouldn't be any fear about whether or not there's lack or plenty. There's plenty. There really is. There's just plenty. If we take care of what we have, if we give people an opportunity to have a little bit of land here and there, and it doesn't take much. I think it was during the Cuban Missile Crisis when the oil was cut off, the oil supply was cut off to Cuba in order to stop their nuclear program or their missile program, that Fidel Castro had to figure out what to do, or else all his people were going to die.
mm-hmm.
So all of a sudden, he was getting oil. And he mandated that everyone it was by law, you had to grow food on top of your land. And if you had any land at all, you had to use every parcel of your land to grow food. And that's just what happened. He saved his whole entire nation by mandating that people would grow food on their land. We've got people here in America that have green grass lawns. I don't know why. I don't know what purpose it really.
There's some legality about that. Being able to grow, say, vegetables or food crops on your own land, or I know in very many places that's illegal.
Yeah.
Why? Is it unsightly? I wouldn't think so. I just don't know. Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me. If you can't even put a vegetable garden out in your backyard.
And we're talking about people here who, are engineering the space race program that Ronald Reagan talked about. The Star Wars. We actually got it now. We sure do. All sorts of nonsense. We got. Is it Albergen? I think it's Albergen. I'm not pronouncing that right, but there's this multi-billionaire astrophysicist who founded a country called Asgardia, and this is a literal thing. I don't know how many this was like about 3 or 4 years.
I checked into, there's like 3 or 4, if not more, these little countries that have instituted themselves through somebody that's quite wealthy, that's decided that they are going to have their own country, and they've been able to do that. There's at least one in Europe that I remember. I can't remember the name of it. I looked into this a few years ago because of course, who isn't thinking, if this tide doesn't turn, maybe we need to get out of here.
Yeah, and it's a space station nation based off of AI, quantum computing is what it is. And I don't know how many, the last I knew there was at least 300,000 people who were officially citizens of this.
Well, let's ask people if they know about this to drop a comment or an email or something so we can look into this.
Yeah.
It would be worth looking into, really would.
Oh goodness. So
well, we got about 10 minutes. We can do this again.
Yeah, sure. Let me just say, I have been on the road quite a bit. I made my trek from Florida all the way back to Missouri, went from Missouri to Montana, stayed in Montana for a while, and did some work for a Bible publishing group there, which was really enriching for me in my walk. And then from there, we did some traveling all the way down to Arizona. and stayed in Arizona for a while. Actually went down all the way as far south as Aravaca, which is about 10, 15 miles from the border.
Mhm.
And saw a lot of interesting things going on there. And while we were there, the COVID thing happened.
Yeah.
And so Aravaca is a really interesting town because it's an unincorporated town, and there is constant Air Force activity and military testing and activity going on overhead. I mean, there's just planes breaking the sound barrier all day long. You're dealing with your house rumbling and, you know, trying to have a conversation. You're like, oh, okay, there they go again. And I remember one night we were up there and
Naval Air Force Station, NAS, and yes, constantly sonic booms, stuff flying over. Go ahead. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, fine.
Go ahead.
Yes, it was that was very interesting. But we decided to make a trek back up to Montana at one point. I believe it was in August, beginning of August this year. And we ended up driving through, of course, we drove through Arizona. We saw all the changes, all the businesses shut down, all the paranoia that everyone was going through. No one knew what was happening at all. It was the most absurd thing. Is how on earth can you shut down the whole entire globe overnight? I've never done. That is the most absurd thing.
Yeah.
It really is. And to top it off, you've got every single country and government on board pulling people out of their cars and beating them because they're trying to go to the grocery store and they're supposed to be in quarantine lockdown. It's like, well, I got to get some food. You can't shut down the whole world.
It is ridiculous.
Yeah, so we saw the changeover, real interesting. Certain states, just the type of propaganda. New Mexico was terrible. Arizona was really bad. New Mexico was really bad. Drove through parts of Texas. Texas was halfway okay. There were still some people in Texas that seemed to have their head on straight and weren't into the fear factor of everything, and, you know, did some questioning, continue to live their lives. Oklahoma, we went through there as well, and Oklahoma is a little bit better than some of the other places, but it's kind of tottering on the edge. Drove through Wyoming, Idaho. We went in and out of Utah and Wyoming, and that wasn't so bad. And in that region near the Teton Mountain Range, and going in through even Montana. Montana was a state where people just were like, we're not messing with this. It was just really interesting to me because I saw Colorado was terrible. Colorado was one of the worst. I would advise people to not move to Colorado. There were just certain states that seemed to be more so on board with the others. What I'm seeing and viewing is that this really is, you know, not just a great reset, but it's a great divide. What we're looking at here is per state. There's a great divide of people standing up or bending over, however you want to look at that. Pardon my French, but, you know, some people are just like, whatever, okay, you told me to do it, I'm going to do it. And other people are like, are you sure about that? The whole world's shutting down. Something's not right here.
Not right. Let me ask you one more question before we go, and then we'll get back together next week if it's all right with you. If you had the choice now, all things being equal, to go back to the cubicle in the 17 years, which I imagine was pretty stable living for you, because it hasn't been stable since then, would you go back?
Absolutely not. No way.
One more question
No
then.
way.
Did you find Hebraic type people in all these travels everywhere you went? How'd you know where to go?
Not very often. Not very often. I went specifically to Arizona because I'd done some research. My father did a paper in college. Come to find out that I have a unique heritage called Molokan, and they are known as old Christians in Russia. And my family came on my grandmother's side and my father's side actually came from Salim, Turkey, at the base of Mount Ararat. And when I did the research, I found out that my bloodline on that side actually observed the Moedim. They observed the dietary laws, and they pretty much followed what we would consider a modern day form of Messianic Judaism. And I thought, how intriguing is this? And I never was able to connect with that side of my family because that my father made when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
And so he separated me from a lot of they originally settled in a place called Russian Hill in California, near Sacramento, I think it is. I think it's a few hours outside San Francisco, actually. But I did some research and found out that there was some migration patterns that they had followed that led them down through Arizona. And so that was predominantly my main reason for going down there. I was doing research and trying to discover if there were any other communities that related back to the Molokan faith and people that I could reconnect with potentially. And there was a unique thing that happened before we began, and all of a sudden in a very rural area where we were staying, this couple showed up with 3 beautiful children who were Russian, and they were following the Molokan path. And it was interesting because we went and we had meals with them, we talked with them and engaged with them. And wife was Vitaly and Esther and Ruth, and it was the married couple was Vitaly and Ruth, and they had 3 beautiful children. She made the 17-layer cake. It was, oh my goodness, it was a 17-layer like cheesecake, but it was according to this old Russian like cultural recipe. Oh my goodness, that thing, I could eat that for the rest of my life.
Yeah, for sure.
But I connected with them, and it was just like something that Father ignited in my heart. He's like, go search this thing out.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one day I went over there and they asking me questions about the 2 witnesses, and they were really concerned and curious about the 2 witnesses. And they asked me a few other questions. And I said, well, I did find out that I do have this Molokan heritage. And he, all of a sudden, his eyes got all big.
Really?
He's like, Molokan? Yeah, he was like, Molokan? And I was like, yeah. And he got on the phone. He was talking in Russian to somebody, Molokan. And I told him where I had found out about my family, where they're located. And he's like, I got to go there. I'm going to go there. We're going to get ready to leave now. And he was staying on this Amish community. And I thought we were going to leave when they left. I went and walked over there one day to go visit with them, and they were gone.
Really?
They just split. It was like
They just split?
About that, he made us. They were gone. They were just gone. I thought, Father, what is this? What is going on here? And it was just little signs like that, things happening to me. It made me really ponder deep about it. And I found out that the Molokan heritage is cataloged in the Library of Congress here in America more than any other spiritual belief in the history of the United States. Why is the U.S. government so concerned about cataloging this group over any other group? And it's not like there are a lot of Molokan people anymore. I mean, they're kind of hard to find really anymore. So that was the predominant reason why we went south, and then we traversed a certain route.
That is
kind
strange.
of
Let me check how you spell that, because I want to look into that. Can you spell Molokan for me? I wrote it here, but I don't know if it's right.
Yeah, sure. There's a couple variations. MOLOKAN, and then there's you spell it that way with an E at the end. And then I've also seen it spelled MOLIKAN. Now, the name is Russian in origin, so this is a phonetic rendering in the English.
Mm-hmm.
But what it actually means is milkman. And the reason why they were tagged with this name is because Lenin, during the Bolshevik Revolution, I believe,
yes,
had mandated he had said that there was some kind of he said that there was a famine, and because of this famine, he mandated that the people in the regions and the territories they were over, that they all had to fast 200 days out of the year. And so the Molokan would sneak milk over to people so to keep people from dying, basically. So they were like the relief for what Lenin was doing. And the name just stuck with him. So,
well, thank you, my brother. Well, let's get back together next week, and I'm going to publish this, if I have your permission,
sure,
online just as soon as I can. And I really appreciate it. Thumbs up to you. Best fortune in Yahweh, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Shalom.
Shalom.
Shalom.